Welcome to Fails and Fixins, your podcast where we take a social media, a public relations, or a marketing fail, and we figure out a way to fix it so that maybe it's just not as bad as it seems. Or we use the power of hindsight to say we told you so. Either way, I'm your host, Dave Plough. I'm the CEO and the founder of Digital Buzz LLC, and I am also a master of public relations, or at least I hold my MA in public relations. Today, we are going to take a journey north, and we are going to go into the great country of Canada and take a look at what has gone on with a national treasure of theirs, a little company you may or may not have heard of, known as Tim Hortons. Now, to take a look at this company, we have to step back a little bit. In fact, we're going to go back to the year 2003. And we're going to look at what was happening here in America to understand why things changed in Canada. So, the year's 2003. A little company known as Krispy Kreme Doughnuts are taking the world by storm. Now, here in Indiana, it was difficult for me to even back out of my driveway without seeing a bright, flashing red neon light that said, "Hot Now." These things were popping up like whack-a-moles. Everyone in the donut industry was taking notice. And I would like to say, I think of the donut industry as a mob-run business. Like a whole crew of Soprano-style wise guys talking about rising yeast and the perfect water to powdered sugar mix for glaze. Instead of hanging out at the Bada Bing, these guys hang out in the back of a donut shop, drinking coffee and hatching plans to take over different territories. But that's just my mind. Let's look at what was really happening. This all leads me to talk about Tim Hortons. Now, Hortons is a long-time Canadian staple. They're as prominent in Canada as Starbucks or McDonald's is here. And in fact, for a time in the mid-00s, there were more Tim Hortons in Canada than there were McDonald's. Just to give you an idea of the scale of this company, if you don't already know. I'm sure many of you do know, but some of you have no clue. Their chosen wares at Timmy Hortons, Little Timmy's. Is it Timmy's or Little Timmy's? I don't know. I'm sorry, Canadians, Canadian listeners. I don't know these things. I'm just repeating what I read online, so I assume it's true, as most things online. That's a joke. So, anyway, their chosen products are donuts and coffee, and they've had Canada on lockdown since the 90s, and they've been a prominent chain since the 70s. Now, they are a business-savvy corporation, and by corporation, I want to give you an idea of how big they are. So those of us in America that don't know, they were the majority shareholder of Wendy's in the 90s through the 2000s. They held more than Dave Thomas while Dave Thomas was alive. So this company is keeping an eye on Krispy Kreme as it expands across America. And Krispy Kreme has, we're going to go ahead and call it a rapid expansion phase. From the end of the 90s to the beginning of the 2000s. And in 2001, Krispy Kreme made its move and opened its first non-American store in, and please forgive me for butchering this name, Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. Now, the Kreme's move into Canada spooked Tim Hortons. They were paying attention to this little chain that started as Southern U.S. Treasure that turned national, that then became publicly traded Kingpin, and they were worried. They were like, hey, these guys are encroaching upon us. And at this point, I want to tell you something. The Kreme and the Hortons had one thing in common that's very worrisome to Tim Hortons. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a picture of a sign of Tim Hortons here to give you an idea of what that might have been. Boom. See that right there? It's not that top part that says Tim Hortons. This next part says always fresh. Now, I had mentioned that in the early mornings of driving around the streets of Indiana, through the fog and dark, you would all of a sudden see a bright glowing neon light, and it was red. And we're not talking like some scary Twin Peaks stuff. We're talking you saw that light and you knew one thing was true. You were about to get some fresh, hot donuts. And Tim Hortons had a very similar philosophy. They were making their donuts fresh in studio. Like I say in studio because I'm a production guy. They were making them fresh in the bakeries in their stores every day. Twice a day they were making them. And what they did was they kept a baker there in the store to take all the ingredients, put them together, and bake their goods. So if you were a Tim Hortons franchiser, you would buy a bag of ingredients, you would pay a baker to be there, the baker would bake them, yada, yada, yada. So Tim Hortons starts getting nervous because Krispy Kreme's donuts are fresh like every couple hours, whereas at Tim Hortons, once again, twice a day. So Tim Hortons came up with an idea around 2002 that their food maybe would no longer be made fresh on site. Kind of a change. So if we're talking about a company here on Fails and Fixins, things have gone awry. We don't talk about companies where everything goes smooth. We don't look at campaigns or marketing moves that work out great. So let's see what happened here. Tim Hortons quietly purchased a facility in Brantford, Ontario, which began baking donuts. Now, Hortons tried to keep things quiet at first. I found a report of a reporter who asked the National Vice President of Corporate Communications, Patty Jameson, about plans to cook Hortons snack foods at this plant. Her reply was, "We have not made any plans that are open for public knowledge." Now, that sounds like something you would hear on the X-Files when Mulder and Scully would go to Skinner and be like, "What can you tell us about this alien craft that landed here?" And he would be like, "We don't know anything about it that we can tell to the public." Right? Like that's bad. You don't, as a company, as a communications person, you don't do that. But we're not to that part of the podcast yet. So it wasn't long before word got out about what was happening at Hortons. And they had to fess up. They had begun parabaking, pra-baking is what I have written down. So I'm thinking it was parabaking, their donuts and other goods. And that means they would kind of half bake them at this plant, flash freeze them, and then truck them to the various franchises, the various buildings, all the Timmy Hortons that were all around. Those stores would then use specialty ovens to reheat and finish the bake and add whatever else needed to add to them. So earlier when I was making that Sopranos thing, if you had a glaze that you had to make for a certain donut, you would go ahead and make that glaze and add it to the now freshly reheated donut. So everything was still kind of sort of fresh baked, but not really. And this upset their publics. Tim Hortons had been a mainstay of Canadian life for decades, and changing a practice that was uniquely theirs and one in which many of their customers were kind of sticking their personal flags into upset people, and it became a PR nightmare. There were news stories and articles galore covering this, and executives in the Tim Hortons organization began infighting. And franchise owners weren't excited. Now, that's bad. You can't have your franchise owners and your executives fighting. It's never a good thing. So what happened? Well, we had a butterfly effect happen. You know, the butterfly effect where the butterfly flaps its wings here and then like 16 years later, the public's really ticked off at your company. Well, that's what happened in Canada. You see, one of the founders of Tim Hortons was also a franchise owner, so was his wife, and they sued the company in 2008, partially over the fact that they aren't allowed to make their goods on site. They don't like having to pay this. They say it actually costs them more money than hiring a baker and doing it on site. Well, that was just kind of a little crack in the foundation. Since then, everything is busted wide open, and it all stems back to this. You see, now we have franchise owners fighting with other franchise owners, and all of the franchise owners are fighting with big corporate. And the thing is, Tim Hortons is such a public piece of Canadian life that now it's in the news all the time, and their profits are starting to drop. They're starting to sink, and no one is happy, and everyone's tired of hearing about it. And if you want an example of this, fast forward a year and a half from now and think about Starbucks, because we're right on the verge of that same thing happening here. So people are tired of hearing about Tim Hortons, and their profits are sinking. People don't want to eat it. What do you do? What do you do if you're Tim Hortons? If you could get in a time machine, go back to 2003, how would you fix this? Well, I would say, as is the case with most crisis communication, you just be open, you be honest, and you tell the people right away what's going to happen. So you buy this facility, you put out a press release and say, We here at Tim Hortons respect our public and our customers, and we want you to continue to have the highest quality, most Canadian food, donuts, coffee that we can give you. And to do that, we're going to try something a little bit different. We're not going to have a baker in all of our stores anymore, but what we are going to have are these specially made ovens that we've created, which will allow us to bring you the freshest ingredients upon our donuts. And you word it, something like that. You say something to that effect to the public. And sure, people are going to be mad because people want their fresh baked donuts. They liked walking in there twice a day and smelling the ingredients go into these little round balls of joy, because that's what a donut is. It's a round, circular, with a hole in it, ball of joy. So people like that, and not everyone's going to like it. But you know what? People did get over this initial thing. And if you put out a press release ahead of time, people will get over it again. They're going to know what they're getting into. There's not going to be, this donut might taste a little bit different. Then they see a story and they're like, oh, that's what it is. Rah, 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 rah. But that's okay because they got over it. They would have gotten over it quicker if you had just been upfront about it. Now, the other thing, what do you do about these franchise owners and their public fighting with the company? How do you keep that from happening? Since it all stems from this fresh baked fiasco, I would say that you make it an option. If you're the corporate, you make it an option for the franchisers. Be like, if you still want to have a baker, we will still sell you the ingredients. And maybe you even just do it on a timeline. Make it like a 10, 15, 20 year timeline. Like if you still want to do things this way, we will continue to sell you the ingredients and you can pay for a baker to continue to do things the traditional way. And then people have options. Like not only do the franchise owners have options, if there are 4 franchises in a city, you're like, these 2 have fresh baked. These 2 are guaranteed to have the seasonal items I'm looking for. Well, heck. Now everyone has an option. You probably cut out the ability for any of the franchise owners to sue you in the future, but you also give your customers the option to be like, I want a more traditional experience. Or the franchise owners can be like, we don't want to have as much waste, so we're going to let you pre-bake them and then we'll just top them off. It seems like a win-win, and it is a case of where hindsight kind of gives you the ability to look back and create a win-win. Maybe something that you can't see. But you know what it does? Looking back at these cases, looking back at this case and these other cases that we look at, they allow you to see the possible fails in your future. If you come up with a plan and you go, man, this is a lot like that other plan, that Tim Hortons plan where they were going to pre-bake things. How did that impact their business? You can go back and you look at this and you say, oh, it did this. So maybe we should try A, B, and C instead of D, E, and F. So that's it for this week's Fails and Fixins. I will see you all next week when I come at you with another fail and hopefully another fix. If you guys have a fix for this or for any of our other podcasts, go ahead and visit our Facebook page or leave a message wherever you subscribe to your podcast from. Join in the conversation. Let us know what you think. You can email me at dave@failsandfixins, FIXINS.com, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening.